Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, harvest is rolling out across the state. We check in with Southern Iowa progress with Extension agronomist Logan McCrea. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we're going to take a look at South Central Iowa with Logan McCrea, ISU Extension agronomist for that part of the state. Logan, thanks so much for coming back on to Farm Here Daily. Always glad to have you join. And let's just take a glance at harvest. We are starting to see the combines really roll out there and a bunch of corn get put in the bins. So what are you seeing down in the southern part of the state, and what's kind of progress been like in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it. There's been a lot of corn coming out, and with the hot and dry that we kind of got here towards the end of the summer. I think I looked last week, and from the middle of August about till September 15th, we were sitting to relatively no rain to an inch at the most, maybe, and that was probably pretty isolated. So that, along with a lot of the disease pressure that we were seeing with the southern rust, really pushed things to the finish line, and combines have really been rolling pretty hard. Up until last week, we got a bit of rain. Got probably about a half inch to 3 inches in some isolated spots, so that's kind of slowed things down a bit. But as we've been kind of getting back into the groove this week, I've been seeing a lot more combines rolling. So I think with how dry it was, I don't think many producers were really complaining, and I think it soaked in pretty good. But corn-wise, I honestly would probably say anywhere from a quarter to a third done would be my most generous guess on how we are harvest-wise. Yield reports are really kind of all over the board. Like I mentioned, it was pretty hot and dry to the end of the summer, and then disease pressures really obviously been playing a part in that too. So I've heard a lot of people say that they're pretty comparable with the last few years, and then there's been some that are pretty disappointed with how they've been, how this kind of finished and what they're seeing on their yield monitors. And with the way the summer went, I think a lot of people were thinking, record yields, and we, they were expecting that, and now we're kind of looking maybe more at a good to great crop. So I guess if you come into this summer and you were shooting for the moon or shooting for the stars and we landed on the moon, then we kind of hit that mark. So I don't think that there's anything that's going to be too terribly bad. I think it's just a little bit all over the board and a lot of variability. So soybeans, I have seen a few fields getting cut, but obviously with the rain, that kind of slowed things down quite a bit. But as we get going back this week and the weather kind of switches back up here after tomorrow, I think we'll start seeing a lot of those fields be going too.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, where we have the set expectations after all the really great rain we saw, and it was so well spread out, even so it wasn't like lots of rain that was drowning out the crops in most areas. There were some areas like that. But then you got into July, August, September, very, very dry, very, very different than what those very rainy, wet months were like. So as you are looking at the first targeted harvested crops, are they those corn stands that were a little bit questionable? People were a little worried about how well they take a wind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then there's definitely been a lot of sustainability issues in the fields from what I've heard. Even guys that were out there chopping silage, a month ago, they've been really telling as many people as they could that it was going to be an issue. And, you know, I'm going to say last Thursday, there was a pretty good storm cell that kind of went through the area, kind of right through the heart of the area, through Wayne and Lucas County, and then kind of up northeast through there. And, you can definitely kind of tell where it went through. I don't think the wind blew overly hard, but you can definitely tell, the tops of some plants are kind of snapped over and bending towards the bottom. That's not the worst thing in the world. I think most of what I saw, the ear was still up. Everything below the ear and below was still fine. It was just everything above. So it is definitely a concern, and I think that it is something that producers are and should be kind of staging their harvest based on those concerns. So it is definitely an issue for this fall.
Now, when it comes to the crops that you're observing in both soybeans and corn, have you noticed any initial, I guess, soil problems when it comes to compaction or any sort of difficulty? I would assume not because of the lack of rain, but I figured I'd just get that base question out there.
Yeah, I think from the lack of rain part, it wasn't really much of a concern, even going back to silage season, other than maybe, there's a long-term wet spot that's just going to be wet all the time, no matter what. I think as far as causing extra compaction, there wasn't as much of an issue. Now it'll be kind of interesting since we've gotten, a few inches of rain here, last Thursday, Friday, and through the weekend. I saw a lot of combines, grain carts, semis rolling pretty hard over the weekend, trying to get done when they can. And, you know, I do think it's September 20th. I think, I'm not sure if it would be worth it to cause those compaction issues, but now it's looking like here after Tuesday, we're probably going to get some good drying out weather and, hopefully be able to ease some of those compaction issues. So I'm a little concerned about that going forward just because of the the rain coming right here as combines were rolling really, really hard. But as far as issues go, I don't think that's the end of the world. So
How has that rain helped with some of the? I was hearing rumors that we might have a really dirty crop with all the disease pressure that we saw this year, and it was going to be potentially really dusty and fire concerns. Has some of that rainfall down in the southern part of the state really helped alleviate some of those concerns?
oh, absolutely. I mean, with how hot and dry it was, it did really seem like a field fire waiting to happen. And at every corner or field you went to, it seemed like that was just going to be the biggest concern. And some people were bringing their water tanks out just to be being cautious, just trying to be aware of it. So I do think this rain will be really, really beneficial for that. And I do think people were aware of it too, though, so that they were taking extra precautions, whether they were, blowing their combines off a little bit more often and cleaning their air filters out a little bit more often. So, the nice thing is when we're in a weather pattern like that, it's no secret that fires are going to be a really big issue. So everybody's usually pretty on top of that, and I haven't heard any in my area so far. I'm only as good as what I can hear, but I'm hoping that maybe that just it wasn't much of an issue as it might have been. So it definitely was a concern, and the rain should hopefully help that out too.
Now, I know there is some good pasture land down in southern Iowa as well, and I was speaking with Angie Reek Hins, another ISU Extension agronomist, just last week in the northern part of the state, and she was saying that in the hay and some of the small crops that are going on up there, there have been some armyworm problems. Are we also seeing that down south?
Yeah, I'm still getting a few calls about armyworms here over the past couple weeks. Now it's getting to the point where producers don't want to take another cutting of their hay because they don't really want to sacrifice the winter, their reserves going here into the winter. So it becomes into a really interesting conversation about what producers want to do with their hay crop, especially if you know, the worm or the larvae are getting over half inch, three-quarter of an inch, kind of at that point it gets a little bit dicey on spraying, and we kind of advise people to kind of not do it at that point, just because you're not going to be able to get a good enough of a kill on those larvae. So there's been some really good conversations around that, and I was a little bit concerned about this. 30 days ago it seemed like I was getting quite a few calls about army worms, and then they kind of run a 30-day life cycle in a typical weather pattern that we see in Iowa. So you figure 30 days later, here we are, and I'm getting quite a few fall armyworm calls. So I wasn't too terribly surprised that it happened, but it is concerning and has led to some good conversations with a lot of producers across the area.
As one of the final harvest impressions you're getting here as we round out the month of September, what are some of the general expectations as you do move into the real peak of harvest activity coming next month?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be a bad crop, and it's not necessarily going to be a record crop, but it is still a pretty good crop, and there's going to be a lot of people going out on the roads. There's going to be a lot of equipment on the roads, a lot of semis on the road. It's going to be a pretty busy time of the year for the next 6 weeks. We don't often get as quite of a dry fall as we had last year, where once everybody started, it seemed like everybody was pretty well able to run until they were done. So I would just urge everybody to stay safe out there on the roads in the field. It's a really busy time of the year. We talked about it, the fire concerns might be down a little bit now just with the rain that we've had, but if it does turn hot and dry again here in 2 weeks, it might be a concern again. So just a reminder to everybody to stay safe, take a little extra time if they need to get to work or a ball game, whatever it is, and just enjoy the fall.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you bringing up the safety issue because as much of a busy time as it is, it's also time to be especially cautious for a lot of drivers who just aren't used to having so many field equipment out on the roads, and unfortunately, that's kind of even though most farmers are not normally at fault for the accidents that happen out there, it's definitely a big hitch in the harvest period to stay extra precautious as you're driving around there as well. Logan, I guess as a final note and kind of on that, I know you yourself are out there sometimes hanging out in the combines and the semis as well. What's just a note that you like to do personally on a personal level of making sure that you're keeping safe as you work with folks out there?
Oh, like I mentioned, I just taken some extra time in the morning to, if you got to get to where you're going a little bit earlier or you got to leave a little bit earlier to get where you're going on time, and just little things like that really kind of make the difference in a time like this. If a combine's going 20, 25 miles an hour down the road, you know, they're going to do what they can to get where they're going safely, and you got to do what you can to get your place safely. So just taking a little extra time, don't get in too much of a hurry, and obviously try to keep the road rage to a minimum. That's my biggest recommendation.
Logan McCrea is a South Central Iowa agronomist for ISU Extension. Logan, thank you so much for your time today on Farm Here Daily, and good luck on the rest of the harvest season.
Thank you.
This is Farm Here Daily, and now we're going to take a look at the marketplace. And there was some red on the board at the close for Monday. December corn, 2.25 cents weaker, 4.21 3/4. March down 2.5 at 4.38 3/4. Soybeans in November, 14.5 cents down at 10.11, with January a decrease of 14.25, 10.30.5. Soybean meal in October, $4 a ton in the red, $278.90. Soybean oil in October, about a penny lower at 49.17 a pound. December wheat, 11 3/4 down, 5.10 3/4. March falling 11 1/4 at 5.29.5. Hard red winter wheat in December, a nickel down at 5.02 1/4. March falling 5.5 cents at 5.23 3/4. In the livestock market close for Monday, there was some green on the board, however. October live cattle up $3.57 a hundredweight, $237.15. December rising $4.50 a hundredweight, $240.22. Feeder cattle in October $7.25 a hundredweight more at $361.35, with November rising $8.97 at $359.90. Lean hogs in October, 82 cents a hundredweight more at $98.80. December rising $1.12 a hundredweight at $88.75. That is the Monday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. And it is going to be a bit of a shorter show on Monday, but I did want to take a look at the Iowa Crop Progress Report that was just released here for Monday. And some of the harvest progress so far it determined was corn for grain at 8% complete. Soybeans, well, it's not quite checked a box yet for a percentage, although there are reports of harvest starting in many parts of the state for soybeans, just no actual percentages being announced just yet. As far as total crop progress, the Crop Progress Report says 95% of corn was dented or beyond, 66% is matured. That is about 2 days ahead of the 5-year average. Meanwhile, in soybeans, those coloring advanced to about 89%, while 62% is dropping leaves. That's about a day ahead of the average. Looking at moisture conditions across the state, topsoil moisture, 3% very short, 18% short, 9% surplus. while subsoil is at 2% very short, 17% short, and 9% surplus. And this is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast and check out our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I'm your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.